think it's certainly appropriate that a message series with that graphic would at least have 1 week that centers on the subject of peace. Peace is a funny thing. You can find on YouTube a host of videos, not unlike the one you just saw, that are street interviews with people, both in our country and abroad. And the interviewers ask people on the street, what's peace? And of course, you can imagine some of the responses that you get. Well, peace is the absence of war. But given that that's about countries and not people, it doesn't seem to pertain to many of us. Other answers you get very common are that peace is peace of mind. But then that leads to the next question, like you saw in that video, which is very simply, okay, we're having a hard time pinning down what peace is, and even when we do, how do you have it? We all may want it, to whatever degree we can define it ambiguously, but how exactly do you get it? And, like many of those people in that video, maybe you would say about yourself this morning that peace is far easier to talk about than it is to experience. Well, peace has a lot to do with the passage that we are looking at from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, for these 5 weeks to start the 2014 Jesus season. We started a couple weeks ago at the beginning of that chapter, and what you found is that Jesus' strategy for changing the world and changing lives didn't only involve himself. In fact, it involved very ordinary people whose names we do not know. They did not stand the test of time. They are people like us who sense their own inadequacy and shortcomings. And Jesus pinned his entire mission in the world on people like that, on people like us. And he sent them out into what he called a spiritual harvest that was ready and waiting for them if they would just be willing to work at it. And last week we found out from Jesus' own words, verses 3 and 4 of Luke chapter 10, that this may not be easy work for the overwhelmed, inadequate 70. In fact, they would go out, the quote is, like lambs among the wolves. There would be a price to be paid for being on mission with Jesus in the world. And Jesus wanted them to know that beforehand. Well, we pick up exactly where we left off last week, which is with verse 4 of Luke chapter 10, as Jesus continues to tell these 70 people how everything rests on them, how they are indispensable to his plans to bring life to those who need it, to bring healing, to spread his message across the known world, into neighborhoods, towns, and cities. And he says in verse 4, carry no money purse, no backpack, no spare set of sandals. We talked about that last week. And then he says, and greet no one along the road. As these 70 people spread out over the 2 Jewish provinces of the day, Judea and Galilee, Jesus says, don't greet people on the dirt highways and byways that you will be traveling upon. And you look at that and you think, okay, that's kind of rude, isn't it? You're passing along this 2-lane dirt road, and somebody along the way waves at you and says, good morning, and are we really supposed to just not say hi? Are the disciples of Jesus supposed to be the most stuffy, unfriendly, unwelcoming people in the world? I can't imagine I would even instruct my own kids to behave this way. as they traveled around. Why do you think Jesus said that? Greet no one along the road. Well, the verses that follow tell you what he meant. So let's start by looking there. Jesus, again, giving instruction to these 70 who will go out and be his messengers and ambassadors, says to them, when you show up in a town, when you show up in a hamlet, to begin to speak of me and what I offer, I want you to do this. Whatever house you enter, first say to those people, peace be upon this house. And if anyone there shares in peace, your peace will rest on that person. But if not, it will return to you. Peace be upon this house. What do you suppose Jesus means? What do you think Jesus wants them to communicate to these people that they will interact with, to whom they will be his messengers? Well, that all depends on what do you mean by peace, right? If we are supposed to offer the houses and families and individuals that we encounter peace, what's it mean? Well, the best way to figure that out is to let the Bible define it for you. And namely, let's let the Gospel of Luke define it for us, because that's where this passage is from. And peace is a term that the Gospel of Luke uses. The readers of the Gospel of Luke would have assumed that this is what peace meant, because all they had to figure it out was the Gospel of Luke itself. Early in the Gospel of Luke, a special child is born during the Christmas season, not named Jesus. Someone named John the Baptist, who will be the forerunner to Jesus, who will pave the way for Jesus' arrival. John the Baptist's father, Zechariah the priest, says this when his son is born. By our God's tender mercy, the dawn from on high will break upon us through my son and through the Jesus that comes after him, to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, and to guide our feet in the way of, there's our word, peace. What do you think that means? What's that tell you about how the Gospel of Luke understands peace? Well, if you've been around the church block at all, you know those are big things that Zechariah is talking about. You know that with the coming of Jesus at Christmas time, you have all of God's hopes and aspirations for the human race, for human history, beginning to come true, beginning to come to fruition. God had a plan, and it took hundreds, if not thousands of years for that plan to come to a head. And that plan came to a head in Jesus. And part of what was going to happen through the coming of Jesus, says Zechariah so long ago, is that God would bring peace. That finally, to the human race, we would have the chance to experience peace. Can you hear in the way that I'm describing it? Can you hear in the way that Zechariah said it? This is big. This is epic in scope. This spans from the beginning of time until now. This is grand in its vision of what Jesus was all about. If you were to ask Zechariah that day, hey, Zechariah, what's God all about? What's God doing in the world? He would have said, oh, that's easy. God is about Jesus in the world. And through Jesus, God will be about peace in the world. Sometimes we confuse what it is that God is doing. Sometimes we think that the thing God needs to be most preoccupied with are our own needs, our own job, the questions you saw in that video. Most fundamentally, however, what God is about in the world are the things that Zechariah said about bringing light upon people who are in the shadows of death, about peace. That finally, through the work of Jesus, the role of Jesus in individual lives, through the message of Jesus passed on person to person to person, people can finally be at peace with one another. This is why Jesus very famously said that his followers would always define blessed people as peacemaking people in the Beatitudes of the Sermon on the Mount. What's peace? Peace is the point of the whole cotton-picking thing. Peace is the point of God's plan. Peace is the point of why Jesus came. Peace. That is not the only way the Gospel of Luke uses the term peace. Several times Jesus says very famously to people he encounters after their interaction, go in peace. This happens to be at the end of one of my favorite stories in all the Gospels, Luke chapter 7, verse 58. We find that in this last story in the Gospel of Luke chapter 7, someone who is described as a notoriously sinful woman comes to Jesus. We do not know what her sin was. All we know is it was bad enough that it was notorious. And she crashes a party that Jesus is being hosted at by many of the religious leaders in the town. She comes to Jesus and she weeps and cleans his feet with her tears and her hair. We don't know why she came. It's not said. We can assume very clearly, however, the reason that she came is that finally there was a voice and a presence in the world who would not outright reject her or shame her or humiliate her or look down on her the way that every other guest at that party would have. Finally, there was a voice in the world who said, you may have messed your entire life up. You may think that you are broken beyond repair. You may believe that there is no coming back from the mess that you've made. But Jesus thinks otherwise. And so Jesus and the guests at that party have an interchange about who is it that loves Jesus the most? The people that only think they need forgiveness a little, or the people who think they need Jesus to forgive them a lot? And the answer is the people like the woman who know that they need to be forgiven a lot. And to that woman, Jesus says at the end of the party, you are the only one here, no one else. You are the only one here to whom I can say, your faith in me has saved you. Now go in peace. Can you imagine what those words meant to that woman that day? What does peace mean in the Gospel of Luke? What does peace mean when Jesus tells those 70 people to go and offer peace to every life and house and family they encounter? It's the peace that that woman found that day. That no matter what you've done in your life, how far you've fallen, no matter how much you've disappointed yourself and everybody else around you, you have never gone so far away that Jesus will not love you and embrace you and forgive you. And let your words and your soul hear what it so longs to hear. You are forgiven. Your faith in my willingness to forgive you has saved you. Now, for the first time in your life, go in peace. Let your conscience be clean. Carry around that burden no more. Be at peace. Put those things together now and rethink about what Jesus was telling those 70 people to do. Go about to these small towns, to these cities, to these farms. And when you encounter people, you offer them peace. What's that mean? It means you offer people the chance to get on board with what God is about in the world. What from his perspective is the only thing he cares about. The thing that he has been driving for all of human history to accomplish. To bring peace to people. And through people to relationships. And through relationships to towns and neighborhoods. Extended families. And from towns and extended families to countries. This is the point of his plan. It always has been. That's why Jesus is called, among so many other things, the Prince of Peace. And those 70 people would walk around and they would say to the lives and families they encountered, hey, peace to you. What's that mean? It means no matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter how poorly you think of yourself or other people think of you, you have not strayed too far for Jesus. And all you got to do is be like that woman in Luke chapter 7. All you got to do is be willing to come to him as you are, and you will hear from him those great words. Your faith has saved you. Go in peace. This is what it means to be a Christian who offers peace to people. It is big and grand and epic, and it is personal and deep and moving. However, this probably means that we need to pause and recognize, just like they would have a long time ago, those 70 people could not offer something to somebody else that they themselves had not experienced. Can you imagine if you were one of the 70 that day and Jesus said, I want you to go about from town to town, from person to person, from life to life, family to family, and I want you to offer them peace, as you now understand peace should be defined. And maybe one of those 70, maybe more than a few of those 70, thought to themselves, wow, but I don't know that I've experienced that. And I would say to you, wow, we as a church say we want to be on mission with Jesus in the world. We want to be a group of people who are the 70 to those around us. Therefore, we need to ask, every single one of us, do you have the kind of peace that we are supposed to offer other people? Because you cannot give away what you yourself have not experienced. This explains, at least for me, why it is that some Christian people struggle so greatly to be a person of peace toward others. This explains why some Christian people can, in their worst moments, treat other people around them so badly. This explains why some Christian people think that the last thing in the world they are capable of doing is speaking to somebody else about their relationship with Jesus and what it does to their life. They have nothing to share because you cannot share what you yourself have not experienced. And so all of us, myself included this morning, have to ask, do you get it? To be a follower of Jesus, to be one of the 70 means that you think peace is one of the single greatest things you could ever be about as a person. That frankly, being about the cause of peace is more important than your job. It is more important than who your friends are and who they're not. It's more important than what you buy, where you live, or how much money you make. Because according to the Gospel of Luke, and yes, the entirety of Scripture itself, peace is what God is about. Peace is what God has been trying to accomplish all along in human history, and that plan came to culmination in Jesus. And if you are going to be a follower of His, then you have to be a person committed to peace. And not just in principle, being what Jesus says in the Beatitude is a peacemaker. You understand that, hey, we may say a lot of things about God, who He is, what He wants, what He does. But ultimately, one of the very few things that God cares about most, wants most for humanity, is peace. And we, of all people, will give our lives to trying to make peace between ourselves and others. Other people who do not have it. How committed to peace are you this morning? It's what God's all about. And maybe why you don't experience this kind of peace is the other facet that you saw in the Gospel of Luke. Perhaps you do not treat God the way that woman did so long ago in Luke 7. Maybe you don't see yourself the way she does. My reading of the Gospel of Luke chapter 7 is the only people who find that kind of spiritual peace, the kind that we all crave somewhere deep down. The only people who find that are people like her, who understand that they are deeply flawed. They have alienated themselves from other people. Other people do not understand them. They feel like they disappoint people all the time. They may feel like, just like her, that they are notoriously bad in some respects. These are very broken people. And they are the only people, apparently, who are able to come to Jesus and throw themselves on his mercy and say, yeah, you know, this whole thing of trying to make my life work on my own, it's not panning out real well. I need you to forgive me. I need you to lighten my load in a way that I cannot for myself. And as such, they find peace. Are you that kind of person this morning? Is that how you understand your relationship with God and Jesus to work? You are not equals in your relationship with God. You understand that, yes? When we come to him the way she does. And the older you get, it doesn't really change. The longer you've walked with Jesus, it doesn't really change. You are never not in need of great mercy. You understand that, right? If you don't, you won't have peace. And that's why you can't give it to anybody else. You ever been around somebody who you could tell was one of the most compassionate, kind-hearted, gracious people you knew? They just had that vibe, that aura, that persona about them. And they're the kind of people that, you know, they might be easy to overlook, but man, when you spent time with them, you felt that warmth, that acceptance. No matter how bad you felt when you started talking with them, at the end of it, you always felt better, more uplifted. You felt loved. You know people like that? Yeah, the reason they can be like that is because they know what it's like to find the mercy of Jesus the way that woman did. And they know what kind of peace it brings when they stop pretending about who they are, how messed up they can be, how confused, and they just throw themselves on the mercy of Jesus. And they cannot help but treat other people the same way. The reason that Christian people have a hard time doing what Jesus asked the 70 to do is because they don't see themselves that way. You cannot give away what you yourself have not experienced. And gathered around the globe today, there are probably, very literally, millions of Christian people who cannot do what Jesus asked the 70 to do because in either respect, they've never tasted it for themselves. Jesus continues and says, I want you to offer peace, the kind of peace that we've been talking about for 20 minutes, to every life, every family, every house you encounter. And he says to these 70 people, to us, who want to be 70 people like those 70 so long ago, he says to them, now here, be aware. You're going to encounter people who will instinctively respond positively to what you have to say, to what you have to offer, to what I'm all about that you will be talking to them about. There are people who, the quote is in these verses, who will share your peace. Here's what's intriguing about this. Those people in those two verses that you will encounter who will respond with an openness to what you have to say and offer, they're not Christians yet, are they? These are people who may have never heard about Jesus at all. In fact, that's the implication of those two verses. The 70 have not shown up to talk to these people about Jesus yet. But when they do, and they talk about peace the way that I just did, there is something in some of the people that they will encounter that innately says, yes, that's what I want. That's what I've always yearned for. They share that perspective on peace. When Jesus says that in verse 2 of this same chapter, the harvest is abundant. It is ripe. It's waiting for you. This is what he means. That there are already people out there who are ready and willing. They yearn and long to hear about peace that they can have through Jesus. They're just waiting for you to tell them about it. To tell them what you've experienced. How peace is the anchor of your life. How peace is the mission of your life. How through peace you now have freedom in your life. And you can now stand tall and walk with Jesus. You no longer cower. Yeah, this is what they want. They yearn for it. And the moment you speak to them about it, they leap at the chance to say yes. I've known all along that this is what I wanted, and finally I get it. You are telling me what my heart has already and always longed for. This is how it works. And there are people 20 centuries later from that passage in Luke chapter 10 in your life who are just like them. There are people in your life today who are ready to share in the peace of Jesus. They just need you to tell them about it. They just need you to come and, as we'll talk about in a moment, make an investment in them. To give them the chance to say, yes, I have finally found the overriding purpose of my life. And it's far greater than my career or my next car or where I go to college or when I'll retire. It's peace. And finally, the burden that I feel that I've been carrying my whole life because I don't measure up to my own standards or other people's, finally, I get it. Those things can be loosened. I can be free. That's peace. And there are people ready and willing to hear, to say yes, if you'll just speak. It's remarkable how positive and optimistic this perspective is that Jesus gives the 70 in Luke chapter 10, verses 5 and 6. If Jesus had said these two verses to you and you had been one of those original 70, you could not have helped but leave his presence feeling like, wow, this is a grand adventure. I get to go explore and to discover what lives are already open to the message and purpose of Jesus, to peace. He told me they're out there. Now I just have to turn over the stones and see. Now I just have to knock on the doors and see. All of a sudden, this isn't nearly as intimidating. It's not nearly as scary or frightening. It's certainly not nearly as negative as often we think about it. Jesus says there are people all over your life who are ready to share his peace. Now we just have to go work in the harvest. And please note what comes next. Jesus says in the next verse, here's what you do. When you find one of these people or one of these families who respond affirmatively to the message of Christian peace, I want you to stay with them. I want you to sink down roots. I want you to drop anchor and stay with them. And allow yourself to enjoy what they will provide for you. Don't bounce around. Stick and stay with them. Don't move around, as Jesus says explicitly in the last sentence of that verse, from house to house. You want to know why he said don't greet people on the road? That's why. That's why. Jesus said to these 70 and to us 20 centuries later who want to take on for ourselves as a church, as individuals, the mission of the 70, it is better to invest in one person, one family who responds positively to the offer of peace than it is to invest in dozens of people who may not be ready, who may not care, who may not be at the place in their life where they are even willing to entertain how important peace is for them, for their direction and purpose in life, for their own spiritual well-being. Yeah. Jesus would tell you, just move on. It's okay. But man, when you find that life, when you find that family who's ready, then you stay put. And you partner up with them. You invest yourself in them. You build a relationship with them. This is not a drive-by. This is not quick. If you're going to be a part of the small group study this winter and spring, and you read through those chapters from the book When Helping Hurts, what you're going to find a lot of is that this is the way, if we mean we're going to be a love your neighbor church, this is the way we have to do it. It does not mean you do small things one time for one person here, and then one person there, and then another person there. That's actually, in some cases, it's very hurtful to both you and to them. Jesus' way here is different. No, you find those people of peace. You find those people who long for it. And then you invest your life in them. And what you will find is it's mutually beneficial. Just like the initial 70 would have found so long ago. This has the potential to give to you every bit as much as you give to them. You will get every bit as much as you give away. Even if these people are starting at square one spiritually, all they know is they yearn for the kind of peace that they see in you and that they hear in you and that you say Jesus has to offer. Those people will give to you things that you cannot even right now see. Your life will be so much better, so much more enriched, so more energized by their presence in your life every bit as much as your presence in theirs. If we were going to be a church who took seriously the mission of the 70, if we say about ourselves we want to be a church that loves our neighbor, it has to look like this. It has to look like you being very thoughtful and strategic, very prayerful and reflective about where you will invest yourselves in the lives already around you who are ready and willing, open to the message of peace. You think you can be that intentional, that deliberate, that wise about where you give your hours, your emotional energy, your relational time? This would be the counsel of Jesus. He would say, give it to the people around you who share your peace. I was reminded this week as I put this together about how we as Christian people are supposed to be people of peace, who offer peace to those who are open to peace. About these two quotes from two very famous Christian writers and leaders separated by about 700 years. First, this is what C.S. Lewis, the great writer from the last century, said. He said that God cannot offer us a happiness or a peace apart from himself, because It does not exist. You cannot have it because it is not there. This is how we, as Christian people, view our lives. And this is how we view the lives of everyone around us. We all want peace, and we cannot define it. We all want peace, and we have no idea how to get it. For us as Christians, we say, yeah, you cannot have that without God. You cannot be a peacemaker who will give your life and your hours and your energy to making peace in your little part of the world among the people that you know. Hey, you can't do that without God. You cannot find the peace that comes through ultimate forgiveness by God Almighty without Him. And the lives around you will only find peace if they find Him too. And they cannot do that without you. And that reminded me of this. Said by the great Francis of Assisi so long ago. He told those Christians back then, while you go around proclaiming peace with your lips, be careful to have it even more in your hearts. Peace is a word that, especially around Christmas time, you and I will hear a lot. In churches, on Christian radio stations, in the songs of the season. That's proclaiming peace with our lips. And St. Francis says, yeah, but all the more, be very mindful that really it starts with you having peace in your heart. Because you cannot give away what you yourself have not experienced. You have to experience peace in order to offer peace to those who long to share your peace. That's really where it all begins. Would you take a minute here at the end of the message and simply talk to God about those questions on the screen? The first of which has to do with you and whether or not you have the peace as it was described this morning in your own life. But then I want you to take the next step, which is to ask God to begin to open your eyes this week to the people who are already in your life who yearn for the kind of peace that we described, who would emphatically and affirmatively say yes to you investing your life in them if you just did it. Would you pause for a moment in the quiet and pray about those things, and then I'll pray for us.